Welcome back to the Soar Hire podcast, a show for leaders by leaders. It's focused on providing business and career advice, tools, and resources to help people achieve higher levels of success in their lives. It is a true honor and privilege to be back with you. In this segment, we have an outstanding person on the show. We're really excited to have her on. I'm your host, Coach Jason Ballard, and today we have somebody that I think is quite a phenomenal person doing some great things out in the world. Have you ever thought, what does it take to perform at your best? You know, you wake up every day and you're like, oh, what a great day. The sun's out, the birds are chirping. I'm going to go out there and be my best today. What is that? How do you define that? How do you tap into that? How do you know when you've done that or when you haven't done that? Is that just a feeling or a thought? We're going to find out. It's actually a science. There's a science to this. And we have the privilege of having the expert that seems to be in this entire world, Dr. Carla Fowler, on the show to break this science down for us and help us all understand how to tap into our God-given talents and abilities and perform at our best all the time. And so let me introduce you to Dr. Carla Fowler. Dr. Carla Fowler not only is a medical doctor, but she also has a PhD in these related studies, is the founder of a company called THAXA, which is an elite executive coaching organization that helps scores of leaders operate at peak performance. Dr. Fowler, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jason. It's great to be here.
We are so happy to have you here. Dr. Fowler, just help us get to know you. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're coming from and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, this story takes lots of different kinds of turns in it, but often it gets asked because most people who end up going down like a medical and an academic medicine pathway like I did don't then sort of at the end of that make a big pivot and say, actually, what I think I want to do is develop an executive coaching method that is all built around performance science. And that was something that was a pivot that happened for me about 10 years ago. And a lot of people say like, well, what were you thinking? Or, how does that happen? And it becomes less weird when you sort of understand the internal dialogue or the things that really kind of drive me inside. And, growing up, grew up in the Seattle area, middle kid. And sometimes when you're in the middle, you kind of fade into the background, like no one's paying attention. And I had wonderful parents. They were paying attention, but for me, it was a little more like, oh, well, but you got to kind of define yourself. You're in the middle. You need to find a way to be unique and to do that out in the world. And I think one of the things for me that really came out probably as early as 5th grade was this idea of saying, oh, like, if there's a challenging thing and you can figure out how to do that challenging thing, like, you both feel way more capable. Like, it's a way of proving to yourself that you're like, oh, I can do more than maybe I thought I could. But also it seemed like, based on my 5th grade understanding, like a good way to sort of get along in the world, and to deal with the uncertainty that's inherent about changing landscapes and things like this. And we backpacked a lot as a family growing up. Like, that was what we did for our vacations in the summer. We were in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, and my dad he used to be a mountain climber, and he had a sense of adventure. You could argue my mother had an even greater sense of adventure. She was also a climber, but she was the one washing diapers and like hanging them on trees to like dry them out. So we literally started backpacking young. But all of these things kind of combine to the sense of wanting to build a sense of capability. And I think that's the early bit of that interest in performance. How do you be good at things? And I bring it up not because I think everyone wants to hear about my childhood, but because I think that performance sometimes seems like this way off, super sophisticated thing in the future, or really high level. But I think we've all been kind of dealing with it from the time we are very young. So fast forward a little bit, I was very much a math and science brained person, but also like really socially oriented. And so a path in medicine made a lot of sense for me. You get to problem solve with the science, but also you have this really, really clear connection to people, helping people, understanding them with stuff that really matters. When they're trying to make a health decision or decide whether or not to get an operation, that it's meaty stuff. And I think that was probably another thing that really was an important driver for me, was like, what's really important stuff? How do you get to work on that? What really matters in a field or to our existence? And so those are some of the parts of like how I ended up in that medical pathway. And ultimately, in the middle of that, I was interested in studying the science of it as well. So I got a PhD and ultimately ended up as a surgical resident down at Stanford. And this is not surprising given that I was really interested in performance, thinking about how we do really hard things. Like, what is a better specialty than like going into general surgery? The surgeons have to see their choices, own their choices, and then improve their choices. You have imperfect data, and you can never like sort of try a little bit of surgery. It's like you're going to cut someone open or you're not. And either one of those decisions could have good or bad consequences. There's some areas where you could try a little bit of a drug and see if it helps, and the downside is not as big. And you have a little more wiggle room. Surgery, less so. So that I bring that up just to say, in our careers, we can be following a set of values and things that we really love and are interested in, and they can take us a lot of different places. And that it doesn't necessarily always look cohesive on the surface, but internally it can be very cohesive. So a lot of people are like, okay, great. So you're doing surgery, do you love it? Like, how's that going? How do you end up, mid-year in that intern year, deciding that actually at the end of the year, you want to leave and you want to go do something else? And I think, the answer to that is something that when I'm working with clients, when I'm thinking about performance, comes back to this really root question. And it's a question I think we always need to be asking ourselves, which is, what do you really want? And we have to ask it to ourselves over and over again in life, because what we want changes. And I think one of the things I was realizing was that I really wanted a multi-channel life, and I really wanted more autonomy and time to both like explore performance and continue to use myself as a guinea pig. I had always done high-level athletics while I was studying or working, and surgery was the first time in my life when it was like, no, you get one thing, and then the rest of the 8 hours you have left every 24-hour period needs to go to sleep. My partner at the time, my fiance, who's now my husband, and if there's any time left, maybe you exercise, maybe.
Wow.
And I think when I asked myself that question, what do you want? It was like, there are many things about this, like a surgical career that I do want, but it doesn't allow me enough room to want some of the other things that I want. And so I think I need to go back to the drawing board and see if I can't take those values, those intense interests and passions, and say, where else can I position these in a way that I can help people, that I can think about the science, that I can really still be ambitious and really do work with depth and impact. How else could I package and position this, and so that I could have more of what I want? And that was what started that pivot towards saying, I need to study performance. This is what I love, but I can help people with it in a really different way. And that is in working with leaders, doing executive coaching. So that is the combo of how did I get here? And also just a little bit of what was I thinking?
Well, I think everybody goes through that at certain stages of their life, and what a great story. Thank you for sharing, your personal story with everybody. Um, it's kind of goes back to that classic notion that, where one door opens, there's two, three other doors that open you don't even know exist. And, had a guest on, also a client on here recently. The title of that podcast was, open a door, open at least one door. Just make a move, do something, take action in the path, in the direction that you want to go, need to go. That will open up other things for you. And so kind of what I took away from your testimonial there is, you followed your heart and your passions, and it opened up a door in the medical community for you to be a surgeon. And I can certainly see the performance piece out of that open up for you, because if you're not good at what you do and you're not focused and you don't have clarity and you aren't lasered in on exactly what you need to be doing in that operating room, and you're not operating at peak performance at that point in time, you might have a bad day. You may hurt somebody, kill somebody, and
Yeah.
put yourself in a very, very tough spot. So you have to be a high performing surgeon. Nobody wants to go to a surgeon, oh, I got
Yeah.
a heart problem or a brain
Yeah.
problem, or some kind of major issue where it requires surgery, and nobody wakes up and says, hey, I was thinking about having surgery on my heart today. Let me go find the least experienced one to do that. Let me go find the one that's struggling the most to do that on me, right? Nobody wants to do that, right? You want to go to somebody that's really good, focused, recommended, 5-star reviews, whatever
Mhm.
you want to, board certified, all that kind of stuff. They need to be good. They need to be the best. They need to perform every single day in that same way, just like, professional athletes do.
Mhm.
What's the difference between Tiger Woods or Michael Phelps or anybody else that competes in their space? Small incremental things make the difference between good and great, between a college level athlete and a pro athlete, from the
Mhm.
pro athlete to an elite athlete. There's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL, but none of them are Tom Brady.
Right.
Well, what makes Tom Brady special? What makes him the GOAT, the greatest of all time? Well, the performance side of things, which I want to kind of break down and kind of get into the science. What is performance science? Help the everyday Joes like me and the listeners of this show understand
Yeah.
that in layman's terms. How do you define that?
Absolutely. So I would say it's kind of a multidisciplinary field of study and thinking. So I think it has contributions from probably the business schools, thinking about strategy, contributions from psychology, like how do we think
Hmm.
about mindset and all of these elements. And then also a lot of other great thinkers who, whether it's neuroscience or just people out of the productivity movement saying, like, how do we do things effectively and efficiently? And I think it's all the ideas that contribute to how do we as human beings do our best work, perform at our top. And its origins are really in kind of more athletics, in more of that physical performance. And those areas are often much easier to measure objectively. And so it makes sense that that's the easiest place for a body of knowledge to start. But it rapidly transitioned because of the usefulness of the ideas to other kind of high stakes elements. Like the military was an early adopter of trying to say, how do we think about the performance um, of our people, right? Like it has both stressful mental components, it has stressful physical components. And so, in that sense, they were like, that's not dissimilar. This is going to have relevance. The operating room, the cockpit, these were other places where I think the field said, hey, there's something here. This is not just about sports. This is not just
Yeah.
about athletics. And then rapidly, of course, I think the more broad ranging business kind of industry said, oh, Well, our leaders are also making high stakes decisions, worth billions of dollars potentially. They have to look out for the well-being of, large companies, groups of people. They have to do something that's uncertain, where there's not a playbook necessarily. And so that, I think, is how the field has sort of spread to be not just about sports, but it's really about how do we as human beings produce our best results, particularly in times when there is challenge, discomfort, uncertainty, risk. And so that's how I think about it. And as I said, lots of different contributors. I think the last piece I would say is an easy way to break down the categories of ideas. And this is how I do it because I like to make it simpler rather than having it be this big.
Simple is good.
Simple is good. I think there's one theme within performance is strategy and thinking about what are the right or the very best ideas or things that you might want to be doing versus all the good things you could do. So it's a little bit about prioritization and clarity of what are you going to do. There's execution, which is really about, all right, if you've decided, you have clarity about what you're going to do, what is the most effective or efficient way to do that? And often it's what's the most effective and efficient way to do that at scale or through other people, right? A lot of the big challenging goals we take on are not a single player game. So we're thinking about teams, we're thinking about groups of people and how they do that. And then the third theme, I would say, it's the psychology piece. It's that mindset. Where does motivation of a company come from? Or how do you build confidence? How do you bounce back from failure? There's a lot about our mindsets that really contribute to our performance. And so that's kind of the third bucket. And so sometimes it's easier to think about performance science as it's the ideas that fall into those three buckets that really inform how we could do our best work.
Really good. Thank you so much. When you think about performance, you think about a lot of people think about sports, right? So if I'm going to go be an all-star football player, baseball player, whatever, golfer, whatever that may be, there's obviously strength, conditioning, endurance, there's muscle building, there's watching agility and flexibility, just all these different things. But there's also, what makes Peyton Manning one of the top, quarterbacks in the NFL when he played, Tom Brady. They are students of the game. They know the rules of the game better than anybody on the field, and they study their opponents and the game. They watch films. They study strategies, and they're so kind of what I'm getting from you is that, one, it starts with the mindset, right? The clarity in your mind on whatever it is you're doing, what needs to happen to do that well, the mindset behind it, right? The confidence, the self-esteem, and then the other parts, the strategy, okay, what is the plan here? What do we need to do action wise to drive some result of the performance, right? Why go out there and do a bunch of stuff and work your tail off and invest time, effort, energy, whatever, money into something if there's not a payoff or a return, right? So what's the outcome that you're trying to drive through? And then what happens when things don't go according to the plan? How do you respond and adapt to that? So tell you what, give me an example of maybe a client or a situation you've come across in your professional journey of where some things weren't going well and people didn't perform or a company didn't perform up to the level they needed to, what some of the symptoms and the issues were that contributed to a negative outcome. Then I'm going to ask you to do the reverse. Talk to us about a positive story of them applying these principles and how that works. So start off with how not to do it.
Yeah. Well, this is a great question because it gets at what are some of the common mistakes that I see happening. And there are a lot of different flavors of them. But I think one of the biggest mistakes, and often this is on leadership's shoulders to do this because and have it trickle down through a company. But I think one of the most important things is, and I'm thinking of a nonprofit director that I worked with, and here's what I'd say: it's not so much that things were going terribly; it's actually that there was the opportunity for things to go so much better. So,
Yep.
because I think actually many of our leaders are working their tails off, and you've got a hard job. It's a lonely job. And so that's, I think, something that's really important to say. There are a lot of people who don't want that job. But I'm thinking of, so the mistake is that we often think that we sort of know the direction we're going in, but we have not taken the time to really explicitly define that. And the reason, and this is it's a principle of performance. So the positive of it is what to do. And I always call this brutal focus. Brutal focus is something that really helps us. What is usually the default of what happens is we kind of have an idea of where we're going. It's not that we don't know anything about it, but it exists in this like future kind of fantasy land. And the reason I call it fantasy is because if we have not defined it and really kind of brought it into the reality of there's 24 hours in a day, I've got this many people on my team, we've got this much resources, it's easy to say, oh yeah, we're going over there. But when it exists in our mind, it doesn't have to obey the constraints of, okay, well, we've only got 24 hours and I've got whatever, 30 people on my team. That's the number. And we've got this much budget. So, and we feel like we know what we're doing and we think our team knows what we're doing, but we actually haven't like checked in about it. And so brutal focus is the idea of explicitly saying, what is it you want to have happen? Like lay it out in some concrete, specific terms. And then the second part of it is to ask yourself, what are actually the most fundamental drivers towards that? And I say this like, oh, you just ask yourself the questions and you know the answers. And I want to be very clear that it's okay to have to iterate on those, to have to go do some research, to have to ask some more questions, to try and improve those answers if you don't if you don't have total clarity on it. But it's really important to do that. And the story I want to tell is part of what I do when I start working with people as a coach is we start with brutal focus. We spend 5 hours together and I ask different ways to get at those questions to help them get to more clarity. And what happened was we built the framework that I do with people that has a more clear idea of what is it you want to have happen? What are the 3 critical priorities that most contribute to that? Like fundamental drivers. Like if you only had 1 day a week to be a leader, what really has to happen? What does your team really need to be doing, to sort of borrow from Tim Ferriss and like the 4-hour work week? Right. And so we built a framework for this director, and he had clarity. We sort of went all down into the weeds. We came back up. We sort of understood what the drivers were, and he took it back to his team. And he came back the next session and he was like, Carla, he's like, it's incredible. He's like, I took it back to my team and I explained where we're headed. What are the biggest priorities? And my team got so fired up. Like they were looking at the priorities and they're like, that's my priority. Like that's the part I plug into. That's where I matter. And then they were like, well, I want to figure out what's my sort of 139. This is what I call the framework I do. What's my 139 for that, for my part of it? And so the punchline of the story, which was surprising, this was early in my coaching practice. And what I hadn't understood at that moment was that I was never going to work with his team. Like that wasn't, I do one-on-one coaching with the leaders. I don't go to their workplace, but that something that we did together to produce clarity in his mind allowed him to communicate much more clearly. And that actually had a big link to the motivation of his team. That when his team understood why they mattered, how they fit in, what was the landscape, how do they win as a team, like where are we going, that actually had a big impact on a whole different piece of performance, on their mindset piece, and also on their clarity piece. Yeah. But I saw just the waterfall effect of getting to that brutal focus, and how it had an impact well beyond just, I think the leader had a lot more clarity and confidence and sense of like, okay, like I can now see how we need to best position the resources we have, like the man and woman power, the money, the time, how to best position those towards those priorities. But also, there were all these other benefits that kind of came out as a ripple effect. So brutal focus is one of the first really important things that I talk to people about, and that's why it's really helpful.
I really like that. I like your term, brutal focus. I mean, that really kind of gets your attention. Those aren't words that normally come out of people's mouths every day, right? In
No.
general conversation. So I like how you use that in coaching people. At the end of the day, good coaches are leaders, and leaders grow new leaders. And because we can't do it all the time, coaches like us can't be everywhere, and we've done things. We don't need to do it forever. We need to grow other people to do these things, and continue to make the country, the world a better place, right? Isn't it amazing that when you can get one-on-one with a leader, like you said, leaders are lonely at the top. They do have a hard job. It's tough. It's stressful. They got the weight of the world, the weight of the organization, all the problems, all the issues, everything from budgets to strategies to, healthcare benefits, you name it. The CEO, the director, the whoever's in charge has all of that on their shoulders, and that can be a heavy burden to bear, and it does wear people down. It does cause people to second guess themselves, and hesitate and not execute every day with clarity and intention, and with preciseness, of cutting right through the things you need to get through to get things done, and to build people in that process. And so I really like that, because when you can help somebody else gain the clear focus they need, because clarity for clarity's sake means nothing. Clarity is really to help people understand their options on whatever they're dealing with, so they can make the best possible decisions. This is about decision making. Life is about decision making and the consequences thereof, right? People
Mhm.
make good decisions and bad decisions every day, and we make a lot of them throughout the day, whether you realize it or not. And so I love that you are able to help people make those kind of decisions. And what's the ripple effect? They go out, right? Instead of, hey, that's great, Carla, come in and teach all of my people to do the same thing, right? Well, then you're starting to do the leader's job for them. That's part of the leader's job title.
That is something I'm so glad you brought it up. There are lots of different flavors of coaching, and there's lots of different kinds of organizational development that is needed.
Yep.
And yet and there's always trade-offs involved, but it's so interesting you bring that up, because one of the things people often ask me, like, oh, can you come in and work with my team, or do you do group work? And this is one where, like, I've made a clear choice, at least at this point in time, where I don't. But part of that is because there is so much learning and growth that can be had when you work with a leader one-on-one, and then you say, no, like, you get to be the leader and the champion of the change, or whatever is going to happen in your workplace. Like, why take that away? And also, because it's taking a learning opportunity, and it's also the credit for it. And so it's just interesting, and there are different philosophies on this one, but that's something I feel very strongly about. So it's really interesting to hear you bring it up.
Yeah. In my practice, I do go in occasionally and do group types of things. You talk
Yeah.
about, culture, teamwork, productivity, or, time management, or, some topic like, or even sales. I do a lot of sales stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll go in and talk to the group, right? Because, sometimes things just, in every organization, when it comes to communications, it always breaks down in the middle, whether it's going from the
Hmm.
from the bottom to the top or the top to the bottom. Communication always breaks down in the middle. So sometimes leaders say, "Hey, why don't you come in and all this time priority management stuff you taught me has got me zinging along, but my all of my people need this, and we all need to adopt this." And I said, "Yeah,
Hmm.
that sounds great. I'll come in and do it. However, when I come in, you're going to own it. You're going to
Oh, that's
facilitate
awesome.
it. You're going to kick it off. You're going to talk about it for 10 minutes because this is your idea. This is your company. This is not me coming in and you sit in the corner and me take the stage and
Yes.
be the hero that guides everybody to the promised land. I'm not Moses. I'm the coach.
Yeah.
And coaches aren't up front. Coaches are right beside and
Mhm.
right next to you, leading you through that. So I'll come in and do it, but you're going to champion this and you're going to lead it and you're going to be out front, or I'm not going to come in because you're not ready.
Mhm.
No, and it just adds that dynamic that's necessary, because then when you come in and do the training, it binds them all together. They're all
Yeah.
on the same page at that point. If it was just me coming in, they're like, yeah, okay, cool. Jason came, Jason went. Now,
Mhm.
Mr. Smith, the boss, is, whatever he says we're doing today, we're going to do that anyway. Right. And it's like, oh, you're principal, but this is real world. I'm like, no, principle is real world, and this
Yeah.
is how you need to get to it. So I think either way you do that, the key piece is, if you're a leader, of you need to have your crap together. You need to be clear, you need to be focused, you need to be intentional, and take these performance principles and apply them, show them, be the example, so others will emulate that
Mhm.
and proliferate that throughout their culture, and the organization embody that. That's where I think you get a lot of bang for the buck from these types of things. Do you agree, disagree?
I think that is a great way to sort of say, all right, there are benefits to being able to come in and work with a team, but how do you mitigate what might be the trade-offs on the other side? Like what is and
Yeah,
so I think that's a really wonderful way of doing it. And
yeah.
again, like it's for each person, each coach, you pick, maybe like what is your strength or what is your highest work that you want to be doing or that you enjoy doing, because all of us, we have to obey the 24 hours in a day rule also. And but I really like how you asked yourself the question of like, okay, I do want to do this, I can see the benefits of it, and I also know how I want to minimize the parts that might be less good about it and instead make it, we have this saying in my family, we say, if you can't fix it, feature it, right? But like really making sure that you're really featuring what needs to be featured, and so
Yeah,
I like that.
that's really cool. Well, Carla, help me, and more importantly the audience, understand a different perspective of this. Let's say, for example, I am a CEO of a small manufacturing company. We make widgets and we've got 100 people, and we've been around for 50 years, family owned business, grown organically, family environment, everything's going well. There's always room to improve and be more effective and efficient, and adapt with the times and implement new technologies, and lean Six Sigma, I don't know, whatever that
Yeah.
may be.
Mhm.
But if I want to, if I and my 5 other leaders in the company want to improve our personal performance
Mhm.
as a person and as a leader in the profession,
Mhm.
because I don't, in my opinion, and you can argue with this with me, and that's fine,
Oh,
I'd love to
great.
argue with you if you disagree, but I don't think there's a difference between personal and professional.
Mm.
If you're a leader, if you're a professional, you are who you are. You show up to work who you are. There's not a switch unless you're some bipolar fake person in the world. You just don't
Mhm.
show up differently. You are who you are. You show up with those values and principles. And everybody that I've met in the world wants to continue to grow and improve. So
Mhm.
if I'm running a really strong company and we're growing, things are going well, and I say, hey, I listened to the Soar Higher podcast and I heard about you, Carla.
Yeah.
Tell us how we can dial in and perform better as individuals and as leaders for our company so we can make this work. For how would you do that? What is your process? What does
Mhm.
that look like? How long does that take? Help
Yeah.
us understand that.
Absolutely. What it looks like, and again, this is a process I designed, and part of it was kind of looking at coaching as a whole, and then also looking at what did I want to bring to it. And one of the things was just this thought of saying, hey, I think there's these great ideas about performance science, and both from my own experience of being in multiple high performing environments, whether that was like national level sports to being in like a high level academic lab or being in the operating room, just lots of different kinds of experiences to inform how do you distill those ideas into a method that I think would help people who are at that level, when again the stakes are high and when you're already performing really well. Like your example, you're like, nah, things are going well. So what I find is that that's often the moment where working harder or longer hours usually isn't where you get your next level of performance. So
Mm.
I think that is thought number one. And so we talked a little bit about my method already, which is we start with strategy. We start working to get that clarity, that brutal focus. And having an outside foil as a coach is helpful because number one, it allows us to spend a longer period of uninterrupted time actually pursuing the question doggedly. Normally, most of us will not sit down for 5 hours and think strategically. It's just really difficult to do
Hmm.
without interrupting or getting distracted. And so when you have a conversational foil, and I have questions that I ask that are just different ways of getting to that clarity about what really matters about what you want to have happen. What does the next level of performance look like for your company? But also, what are can we get out all the things that might be related to that and then look at it and start to connect dots and say, okay, these are really the biggest drivers. So we spend that time up front because then I find all the work we do after that, we can focus towards eliminating friction to go do those things. And to me,
Mm.
a big piece of how coaching plays into performance, the leader, they are the athlete. They're going to have to go run the race. The coach never goes and runs the race for the athlete. But what the coach can do is increase the clarity that they have about what's the race you're running and what do you need to do, and decrease the friction to going and doing those things. So eliminating barriers, helping learn new skills or techniques to fill in gaps, and then also helping deal with time, because I think time friction is often one of the biggest things that stands between us and saying, what's the future that I want? So that's how we start. And then what happens is I do like 50-minute coaching sessions to follow that. But because we have that shared understanding of an uninterrupted 5-hour starting point, it means that what we do next becomes very potent. And I like to say, and this is something people can use at home, you do not need me to do this, but really we're just then trying to say, okay, with these priorities, how do you build momentum? How do you get some juice into them? And sometimes that momentum or that power comes in a couple different formats. Like sometimes it's how do you get yourself to do it? That sort of power over self, that ability to kind of get yourself to do stuff. I think another form of momentum is really it involves more people. So it's kind of the social assets that you have. How do you
Hmm.
either get visibility with the right people, have the right people in your network who can help facilitate what needs to happen, those types of things. And then I think the third piece is really momentum around basically assets like skills or resources that will be needed to help you start to make momentum on those things. And so I like to bring out the categories because those are often good places to look when you're starting to say, okay, like what's it going to take to do these things that I've identified that are priorities? And then I like to use the 90-90-90 technique. And I 90-90-90 actually describes a state of how things usually go, which is that 90% of people kind of never get started on the thing that they've thought of. I mean, it can be as simple as taking out the garbage, right? Like 9 times out of 10, when you think, should I take out the garbage right now? You think, no. And, eventually, usually at least once a week, you're like, okay, I should take out the garbage. And so it works. But
when you trip over it in the middle of the night, you're like, yeah, I should take that out, I guess.
I should probably take that out. But my point is, getting started is a challenge and it's its own step. Now, once people get started, 90% of people don't keep going on the thing. Like if it's not something that can be achieved in a one step or a really rapid result, it's difficult. We struggle to invest in things over time if there's not like really quick wins. A lot of the big stuff, like growing a company, that's something that often doesn't happen in one quarter. And so we have to think about how do we maintain that building over time. So 90% of people who start like kind of drop off relatively quickly. Then the third piece is really that even for the people who keep going, 90% of the time you keep doing the same thing, but you're not necessarily improving that thing to make it more effective. Now, the reason I talk about this is not to be like, oh, that's just like a depressing state of reality. It's actually to say, when I think of it as a great piece of understanding, because if you understand that, then you can say, I need to do this one step at a time. Like, I just need to get started. Don't think about step 2 until you actually start. And probably most importantly, if you start, just work on kind of keep going. Don't try to improve it too early. Just get used to saying, this is a thing we do now. Like, for example, we run sales performance meetings now, like a stand-up meeting where we have a very quick dashboard and we do it. And maybe the dashboard's not perfect, but it's probably worth saying, for example, we need to get used to everyone knowing that they're going to show up Monday morning and they're going to like have a very quick report of what did I accomplish last week? What do I need to be on track? Where's the dashboard? And what do I need help with? Like, and just get used to it. And then maybe there are ways to improve that process if like a huge sales growth was something that was the goal you had. But if you try and start improving it when people haven't even really gotten the sense of it yet, often that can like create confusion, decrease motivation, and all of that. So I like to say, don't try and do step 2 until you've done step 1. Just get started. Keep going, and don't try and do step 3 to start improving things and iterating on them until you really kind of have a sense of like, okay, what is this thing I'm doing? And are we kind of used to it enough that we can think beyond it and introduce something new? And so that is a tool I find is useful for everything from creating like a really small new habit about like doing some more exercise every morning to how to think about getting your company to do something in a really new way. So it kind of scales up and down, but I like it for its simplicity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, you can't improve it, right? So, on a personal level, you got to look in the mirror and say, okay, who am I and where am I? I spend probably 3 to 4 sessions with people that are in this space. I've got a couple right now that I'm working with. Who am I? They're kind of at a point in their career where I won't say they're lost, but they're in transition. They've achieved something and they're going to achieve something else or going in a different direction. You just don't know which way to go. Not really sure how to really do that. And they're kind of, all of the trailblazing they've done has kicked up some dust on the trail to where now it's kind of fogged their vision on the trail. It's like, okay, do I go this way or that way? And it's like, okay, well, let's let's go back to who am I? And so you, as an individual, you have to know kind of who you are, what your strengths are. John Maxwell calls it the 5 swings.
Mm. Yeah.
On a in a team environment, a company environment, it gets down to systems and processes and communication and strategy and a plan. 80% of companies out there do not have a plan that's written down that every employee has, and they know where they fit into the plan, their goals, and what they're accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
And so until it's written down, you can't improve it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist. You can't improve something that doesn't exist. And so I like your framework. That makes a lot of sense. Last question that I have for you today. This has been just an awesome conversation. I wish we can continue this. Maybe we'll have you back on the show here soon and follow back
great.
up. If I'm a leader of an organization and we're thinking about, getting into the science of performance and really digging deep and taking ourselves individually and collectively as a group to the next level, how do you know whether you're ready for that? So when we call you and say, hey, come coach us, how do you know you're ready for that? What are there signs? Are there things that you would look for when you talk to people? It's like, yeah, you're ready or you're not.
That's an interesting question. I would say generally there are different forces that set us up for change to start to happen. And change, I was just thinking about this morning. You know how change often feels like it's like slow, and then fast sometimes. So I was thinking about how is it that rather than just saying, well, finally the universe conspired that we could make that improvement or we can make that change, but instead to say, how can we break down what are the things that actually, there's multiple facets that have to kind of line up. But if we can actually identify what those are, we can say, where are we on this? Where are we on this? Where are we on this? To kind of line up the stuff that needs to go. I would say that often it's worthwhile that someone says, I can at least have some clarity about what is not going as well as we would want it to, or so that's there's a problem, and it's okay if you don't know totally the root of it, but you can very clearly kind of say, here's the thing, and I don't know how to work on that, but there's a thing. And or sometimes it's we see an opportunity and we really want to go after that, and we need to think about it. So it's not that people have to have clarity, but you need some juice there. There needs some reason to do the work. That's number one. I think number two, a big question, and in some ways, part of my coaching works very well to filter for this, is you need to be willing to put some time behind it, particularly as a leader. So ironically, when a leader is like, there is no way to carve out 5 hours to do this work, in some ways, it's a sign that you might not be ready to do the work, either because the pain isn't big enough yet, or the benefit of doing the work is not clear enough to you that it's not about the coaching. The point isn't that, coaching is not for coaching's sake. No one gets an award because they did all their coaching, right? Like we get awards because of what you did in the real world. And my point is, whatever you're going to need to do in the real world outside of coaching is going to take time. And so a proxy for whether or not you are feeling enough pain or enough desire to figure out, and I help people figure out where to get the time, but you have to have enough of that juice to be willing to start to engage with a coach. And so it's a nice proxy for, first of all, can you describe the pain or the desire that is leading you where you want to go? And then secondly, to say, all right, are you willing to commit some of your time? And then also there's money involved. So some time and resources towards this. Is it important enough to you? And if it's not important enough yet, it might not be the right time. So those are just two big things that I often think about. There's plenty of other smaller things, but those are two great questions.
Yeah, I think one, either there's, I like that, there's either an opportunity in the world that you want to capitalize on, and that means you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to be able to do that. Or two, maybe you've hit kind of a threshold. Maybe you've hit a ceiling for which, maybe you're stagnant. Maybe you're just kind of flatlining as an individual
Hmm.
in your performance as a leader or manager or supervisor, or maybe the company itself, it just hasn't really kind of gotten out of that zone that they're in, right? And um, every organization has maturities. There's, if you follow the Carnegie Mellon CMMI model, there's 5 stages of maturity in every organization, and people get stuck at each phase of those as they continue to grow and mature. And so I think if you're finding yourself in one of those kind of positions, that might be a kind of a signal. Hey, might want to think about some different things. Maybe
Yeah.
having Carla or right kind of coach for you come in and help you figure out what's contributing to those things, what the long term goal is you're trying to look at. And I love the time piece. Time is everything. We all, there people complain all the time. The world's not equal. The world favors the
Hmm.
rich, and there may be some truth to that in certain respects, but at the end of the day, I don't buy into that, because we all have, and you said it, the same 24 hours in the day. What separates the peak performers, the most successful people, the consistently high achieving people in organizations, are where they spend that time and with whom they spend the time with. And so
Hmm.
you've got to prioritize that time and allocate resources of whatever nature that is to that effort. If you don't, it will not go anywhere. If you don't focus
Hmm.
on it and make time for it, it will not go anywhere. And obviously the accountability, right? Once you get thrown into the deep end of the cold pool, the harshness and the reality of the pool being 30 degrees kind of starts hitting you at a certain point, and you're like, oh my God, I've got to start swimming that
Yes.
direction now, right? And so there's got to be accountability there, that everybody keeps swimming, everybody keeps, on task to do their part to move, whatever piece they're responsible for forward, to include themselves personally. So I love that. I think if you're out there listening to this podcast, and you're finding yourself in one of these kind of situations, and you're thinking, man, I know I can do better. I know there's another gear. I know I'm settling for less. I know there's more to me to contribute in the world, and more of me that I can hit on not other levels, that I'm just kind of on cruise control right now. Those are all signs and indicators internally for you to be thinking, okay, maybe I need to talk to somebody like Carla that understands the science, like the in-depth kind of heart and soul level of how this works in a very methodical, structured manner that can actually take you down the path to success, so you don't get lost in the woods on the journey. So Carla, thank you so much for being on the show. It's just an awesome opportunity to spend time with another great coach out there in the world. And thank you for all you do. Coaching is hard, because you are really taking on the world's problems and stresses, and trying to relieve them of those things. And those are really big burdens to carry. So thank you for your service in helping others out there, and all the things you've done in the medical community to help people. Carla, if people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about performance science, they want to learn more about coaching, and what you're doing in your organization, how do they get a hold of you? Share with people how they can connect with you beyond the
Yeah.
show here today.
Awesome. Well, a great place to learn more about performance science. I am always talking about it, and whenever I'm a guest on a wonderful show like yours, I post it on LinkedIn. So it's a great place to follow me, and I'm at Carla-Fowler. And then in terms of just learning more about my coaching practice, if you have interest in that at all, my website's a great place to go. So that's THAXA.com. THAXA. And there's both a great FAQ section. It's also a place to find different podcasts that I've been on. And also, if you really are like, nope, I think I am interested, I want to know more about what this is like, you can message me through the site. We can set up a time to chat and see if it's a good fit for your situation. So those would be the great places.
Outstanding. Again, thank you so much. I tell you, Carla is a wonderful person. She's got a good heart, good soul. She's helped a lot of people, and if any of this, conversational topics we talked about on the podcast kind of touches you and nudges you, then I highly encourage you to reach out to Carla. I think you'll be in really, really good hands. From my experiences with her. So that's all for today's show. Look forward to talking with you next week. Have a great week.